Every toxic friendship starts with a trusted invitation. This is the truth behind the smiles and shared history, a psychological operation engineered for control. We think betrayal arrives with a crash, but manipulation whispers. It weaponizes your loyalty, using gaslighting and strategic undermining until you question your own sanity. For one individual, the realization arrived late, and his deepest connection was a prison built of misplaced trust. This story, rooted in real experiences, pulls back the curtain on the silent erosion of self-worth, chronicling the harrowing, essential journey to draw the ultimate line. Freedom demands confronting the devastating realization that some friends prioritize power over connection. Across the minimalist granite counter, Marcus Sterling, 36, leaned back, tall and athletic, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Ethan. Marcus was always polished, perfectly tailored, radiating an easy, superficial charm that had served as the bedrock of their 14-year friendship and the shared success at the Sentinel Office Park. "You're still overthinking that quarterly presentation," Marcus said, a familiar patronizing tone slicing through the silence. "I told you, the board loved my framing of the data. Your initial draft was fine. But it lacked punch. You know how you get stuck in the weeds." Ethan nodded automatically, the defensive spike in his chest immediately crushed by routine deference. This was the pattern. Marcus would take an idea Ethan had labored over, refine it slightly, or often, just present it with greater confidence, and then subtly attribute the success of the outcome entirely to his own intervention, simultaneously reinforcing the narrative that Ethan was capable, but fundamentally flawed without Marcus' guidance. It was textbook undermining, disguised as constructive criticism. "Right. The punch," Ethan mumbled. He picked up his coffee mug, the steam offering momentary camouflage for the exhaustion etched deep into his features. He was loyal, introspective, and emotionally exhausted, yet beneath the fatigue, a force was stirring, a growing self-awareness that refused to be silenced by platitudes and manufactured history. He often found himself staring at a specific object on his nightstand, the connection journal. It was a simple, leather-bound notebook where, for years, Ethan had meticulously recorded shared milestones, inside jokes, and proof of their unwavering loyalty. Lately, however, the entries had become less celebratory and more forensic. They were painful records of cognitive dissonance. Marcus swore he was out of town the night of the Henderson fiasco. He said I handled it badly. But I specifically remember him sitting right next to me when the email came in. Why would he deny being there? The innocent journal had begun its slow, agonizing transformation into a detailed log of Marcus' calculated manipulation. The relationship was held together by one final, heavy symbolic anchor, the silver key. Marcus had given it to Ethan years ago, a bespoke piece engraved with the coordinates of a shared college memory, symbolizing mutual loyalty. Now, Ethan recognized it for what it was, a clever, tangible symbol used to reinforce the false foundation of the relationship. It was a shackle masquerading as a token of honor. The psychological war was silent, played out in whispers, averted gazes, and selective memory loss, always Marcus' selective memory loss. Ethan had left the Sentinel Office Park late. He needed a document printed from the basement server room before heading home. As he approached the rarely used executive stairwell on the 21st floor, he heard voices. Marcus' voice. Sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of the warm tone he reserved for Ethan. Marcus was speaking to Clarissa, a high-level executive from the acquisition team, notorious for her strict adherence to corporate hierarchy. "And I had to pull Keller out of the fire, frankly," Marcus was saying, his voice laced with practiced concern. "He's a good guy, loyal, but fragile. Remember that massive account, Xander?" He was paralyzed by the complexity. "I had to step in, late nights, weekends, and basically draft the entire strategy myself. He took the lead credit, of course, but I had to make sure he didn't drown. You know how sensitive he is to high-pressure situations." Ethan froze, pressed against the cool plaster wall, his briefcase slipping from numb fingers. The Xander account. Ethan hadn't been paralyzed, he had meticulously built that strategy from the ground up over 6 months. Marcus' sole contribution had been a single dinner meeting and one superficial bullet point added to the presentation deck. Yet, here he was, twisting the shared history, presenting Ethan's hard-won professional success as a narrative of rescue and managerial babysitting. This wasn't a minor lie. This was strategic undermining, a calculated distortion of reality meant to reduce Ethan's standing in the eyes of a key corporate player. Marcus wasn't just gaslighting Ethan, he was actively managing the external perception of Ethan's competence, ensuring Ethan remained perpetually indebted and professionally minimized. Clarissa's sympathetic reply drifted through the air. "That sounds draining, Marcus. You really are carrying a lot of dead weight for a friend." The word struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. Dead weight. In that moment, the chronic exhaustion dissolved, replaced by a devastating, seismic clarity. It wasn't confusion he felt, or forgetfulness, or pressure, it was manipulation. Every moment of self-doubt, every moment Marcus had dismissed Ethan's memories as overreaction, every time Marcus had used Ethan's genuine vulnerabilities shared years ago in assumed confidence as talking points for control, slammed into him. The betrayal was not a trickle, it was a flood. Ethan stayed silent, letting them pass, waiting until the silence of the 21st floor swallowed him whole. He didn't go home immediately. He went back to his desk, pulled out the connection journal, and stared at the engraved silver key lying next to it. He realized the key didn't represent loyalty, it represented ownership. That night, the journal entries changed entirely. He stopped trying to reconcile his memory with Marcus's version of events. He started listing the tactics. Undermining Xander account, 21st floor. Gaslighting the denial about the Henderson fiasco. Weaponization of vulnerability. Marcus making fun of Ethan's anxiety about public speaking, a fear he had confessed only to Marcus. The process of naming the tactics was the true first step toward reclaiming his mind. The realization, however devastating, was also empowering. The true battle was reclaiming the shattered trust in himself, the ability to believe his own perception over Marcus's meticulously crafted narrative. He knew he couldn't fight this alone. The emotional wounds were too deep, the betrayal too pervasive. A week later, Ethan found himself at the Maple Street Resilience Center. The center was everything his cramped life at the Hawthorne Lofts wasn't: quiet, bathed in soft, natural light, and devoid of the metallic echoes of Marcus's relentless presence. This was where his challenging process of setting firm boundaries truly began. His therapist, Dr. Vivian Reyes, specialized in psychological recovery from prolonged emotional abuse. She listened without judgment as Ethan recounted the slow, silent erosion of his self-worth. "The hardest part, Ethan," Dr. Reyes explained during an individual session, "is that you are mourning the idea of a loyal friend, not the reality of Marcus." The reality was a carefully constructed mechanism designed for his control. Ethan struggled. The ingrained pain of broken loyalty made every decision a struggle. He had to learn to disentangle the shared history from the present toxicity. He felt the emotional and social fallout hovering, knowing that detaching from Marcus, who was so deeply entrenched in his professional and personal life, would be explosive. Over the next few months, Ethan started implementing small, painful changes. He stopped answering Marcus's calls immediately. He started taking lunch alone at the Sentinel Office Park. Marcus noticed. The manipulations became less subtle, laced with frustration. "You're pulling away, E. What's going on? Everything all right with you and Sarah? You know you can always talk to me." "I'm your anchor," Marcus pressed one afternoon, leaning conspiratorially close to Ethan's cubicle, an attempt at emotional suction. Ethan, armed with new self-awareness, replied calmly, "I'm fine, Marcus. I'm just focused on getting my deliverables finished on time. I'm handling it." The use of the word anchor grated on Ethan, recognizing it now as a synonym for leash. The internal agonizing transition from denial to devastating clarity was complete. Ethan moved from merely documenting the manipulation in his journal to planning the exit strategy. He had to confront the pain, not just avoid it. He had to cut the cord entirely. Marcus approached Ethan just before the meeting was called to order, his tone dropping into a confidential register, his eyes radiating pressure. The gala seating chart was tedious, high visibility, and completely unrelated to Ethan's expertise. It was a classic Marcus maneuver, delegating a time-consuming, thankless task while positioning himself as the generous friend who was too busy with bigger things. It was another attempt to distract Ethan and reinforce their power dynamic. Ethan looked at Marcus, his mind clear. He saw not a friend, but the pathological controller, the expert in emotional calculus. He realized this wasn't just about the seating chart, it was about accepting one final, subservient role. He met Marcus's penetrant gaze, and for the first time in years, Ethan's voice was steady, resonant, and entirely his own. "No, Marcus. I won't take that on." Marcus blinked. It was a minuscule movement, but in the finely tuned world of Marcus Sterling, it was a rupture. He had expected automatic compliance, perhaps a tired sigh, but never outright refusal. "Excuse me?" Marcus chuckled, attempting to pass off the refusal as a joke. "Come on, it's just the seating, we're a team." "I said no," Ethan repeated, his voice carrying slightly across the now quiet pre-meeting room, causing a few executives to look up. "My focus is on the Henderson account transition, which, as you know, I built entirely from scratch. I don't have the bandwidth for unrelated tasks right now. You'll need to find someone else for Thorne's seating." The public refusal was the critical, defining boundary. Marcus's face froze, the charm melting away to reveal a razor-sharp, furious mask. The narcissistic wound was visible. "Ethan, we can discuss this later. You need to understand the implications of." "There's nothing to discuss, Marcus," Ethan interrupted, cutting off the immediate thread of professional recourse. He maintained eye contact, completely calm. "My professional priorities are clear. And they are mine, not yours." The resulting social fallout was immediate and predictable. Marcus, stunned by the lack of control, stormed off, leaving a trail of icy silence. Within hours, the office whispers started. "Did you see Ethan finally snap? Marcus is so supportive, Ethan must be going through something." The narrative of fragile Ethan and supportive Marcus was so deeply entrenched that many colleagues instinctively sided with the perceived victim, Marcus. Ethan accepted the reality, he had traded a comfortable, false peace for a painful, undeniable truth. The separation had begun. Subject: a cessation of all professional and personal association. Marcus, this is non-negotiable and final. Ethan Keller. He sent it via registered email, ensuring a digital record of the firm boundary. He didn't wait for a response, though Marcus attempted several furious, manipulative calls that night, ranging from feigned concern to outright aggression. Ethan blocked the number, finally dropping the metaphorical silver key into the trash, recognizing it as worthless alloy. The next 6 months were hard, marked by loneliness and the difficult work of rebuilding a sense of self untainted by Marcus's judgment. He had to retrain his mind to trust its own narrative. He continued his work at the Maple Street Resilience Center, processing the grief for the friendship that never existed. In the late fall of the following year, Ethan scheduled his final individual session with Dr. Reyes. He sat in the familiar, quiet office, feeling lighter, his physical exhaustion finally replaced by the quiet strength of true self-awareness. "Tell me about the healing process, Ethan," Dr. Reyes prompted gently. Ethan took a deep breath, looking out the window at the distant skyline, the same sky visible from the Hawthorne lofts, but viewed now without the filter of control. "It's not just about realizing I was manipulated," Ethan began, his voice clear and resonant. "It was about recognizing why I allowed myself to be manipulated for so long. Marcus targeted my loyalty, my need for connection. I kept chasing the ghost of the friend I thought he was, ignoring the predator he actually was." He paused, touching the smooth cover of his connection journal, now filled with notes on resilience and boundaries. "The death of the friendship was painful. I mourned it like a real loss, because to me, it was real. But the betrayal gave me something invaluable, the blueprint for my own protection. I learned to identify toxicity before it destroys me. The red flags are no longer invisible, they are neon signs." He described the relief of having sent the disengagement document, the professional relief of working without a silent saboteur, and the personal triumph of standing firm during the confrontation. "I had to accept that I placed my loyalty in the hands of someone who prioritized power and control. But now, my loyalty belongs to myself. I trust my own perception. That, Dr. Reyes, is the true cost of misplaced loyalty, and the only path forward." He stood up, not as the weary man from the spring of 2021, but as someone whole, equipped with the critical self-awareness necessary to guard his boundaries. The chapter was closed. He didn't emerge unscathed, But he emerged stronger, fundamentally understanding that healing begins the moment one chooses clarity over comfort, and truth over the insidious lie of a toxic bond. He walked out of the Maple Street Resilience Center, ready to navigate the world, alone but free. The heavy quiet of the Hawthorne lofts was a constant reminder of the psychological toll Ethan was paying. In the spring of 2021, the light that streamed through the panoramic windows never quite reached the corners of his mind, which remained shadowed by perpetual confusion. This wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was the fatigue of constantly auditing his own reality against the competing, polished narrative delivered by Marcus. For over a decade, Marcus had perfected the art of the slow psychological chokehold. It wasn't the dramatic bursts of anger that wore Ethan down, but the endless, subtle seepage of self-doubt. Marcus never needed to raise his voice, a dismissive wave of the hand or a carefully worded implication was enough to send Ethan spiraling into a night spent rereading emails, checking and rechecking facts, and ultimately concluding, always, that Marcus must be right. One evening, staring at the perfectly organized spice rack in the modern kitchen, Ethan remembered a specific, innocuous argument from months prior. They had been planning a trip to the West Coast, and Ethan had definitively booked the hotels on a Sunday. When the topic came up later that week, Marcus, eyes wide with feigned confusion, had sworn Ethan had cancelled those reservations and then completely forgotten about it, claiming the loss of the booking deposit was a result of Ethan's recent lack of focus. "It's okay," Marcus had said, laying a hand on his shoulder in a gesture of false comfort. "I know you're juggling a lot. We all have those moments when we just drop the ball on details. I already called the airline and used my points to fix the connection you messed up. Just breathe." The connection had been perfectly fine, and Ethan hadn't touched the hotel reservation since clicking confirm. Yet, Marcus' confident assertion, delivered with that unnervingly sincere concern, forced Ethan into the defensive posture of someone admitting a mistake. He didn't fight back, he internalized the shame, apologized profusely, and immediately began scrutinizing his work at the Sentinel Office Park for similar errors. This was the architecture of the control. Marcus didn't just lie, he manufactured chaos and then presented himself as the benevolent fixer, the stable anchor tethering the fragile Ethan to reality. The silver key, lying inert on the nightstand, felt less like a symbol of mutual loyalty and more like a miniature jail key, representing the invisible cage Marcus had built around Ethan's self-perception. The erosion wasn't confined to personal life. The Sentinel Office Park, a high-pressure environment already conducive to anxiety, became Marcus's most effective theater of operations. Marcus was a master of the corporate maneuver, and his strategy was always to ensure Ethan's professional ceiling was just low enough that he would always require Marcus' sponsorship. Consider the quarterly innovation pitch. Ethan had developed a brilliant, scalable solution for client integration, spending weeks refining the model. Marcus, viewing the material, offered a single, vaguely critical piece of feedback: "It's very academic, it needs simplification." Ethan, conditioned to believe Marcus possessed superior strategic insight, spent 3 frantic days dumbing down the model, stripping away the complex, original elements. When the pitch succeeded, Marcus addressed the team with a subtle, yet crushing modification of history. "Ethan did a great job following my advice on focusing the concept. I knew he had the raw material, but sometimes, the execution needs a pragmatic eye." No one questioned it. Marcus was the charismatic, assertive voice, Ethan was the diligent, detail-oriented worker. The dynamic was professionally cemented. Ethan's loyalty, which was genuine and deep, had been weaponized against his own ambition and competence. He believed that accepting Marcus' critique, even when it felt wrong, was simply part of maintaining the sacred bond of friendship and professional partnership. But the chronic psychological ache began to sharpen into something recognizable. It was the cognitive dissonance of knowing what you saw, what you remembered, what you did, and having the most trusted person in your life relentlessly tell you that your memories were faulty, your efforts insufficient, and your emotional responses disproportionate. The shift, when it came, was seismic, triggered by the truth heard near the executive stairwell, the incident of the silent witness. Hearing Marcus twist the Xander account success, framing Ethan as dead weight, wasn't just a revelation of deceit, it was the final, undeniable proof that the relationship was not built on camaraderie, but on Marcus' strategic need for professional and emotional subordination. The immediate aftermath was characterized by a cold, intellectual fury, replacing the old, confusing weariness. Ethan didn't rush into an emotional confrontation, he retreated into meticulous documentation. The Connection Journal, once a sentimental scrapbook, became a forensic accounting ledger. He sat at his dining table in the Hawthorne lofts for 3 days, surrounded by old texts, emails, and calendar entries, systematically cross-referencing past emotional slights against factual records. The process was agonizing, forcing him to relive every moment of dismissal, every time his judgment had been invalidated. He categorized Marcuse tactics with clinical precision. 1. Gaslighting by denial, example, the West Coast trip cancellation and the fabricated need for Marcuse points. Goal, instill doubt in Ethan's memory and increase reliance on Marcus as the factual arbiter. 2. Strategic undermining professional, example, the quarterly innovation pitch, where his original complexity was dismissed as academic and success was framed as a direct result of Marcuse pragmatism. Goal, keep Ethan professionally minimized and dependent on Marcuse validation. 3. Weaponization of vulnerability, example, Marcus, in a social setting, subtly mimicking Ethan's speech patterns when he was nervous, years after Ethan had confided his genuine fear of public speaking. Goal, ensure Ethan never forgets that Marcus holds sensitive material that can be deployed for social control. Each entry in the journal was a painful piece of evidence, yet together, they formed an undeniable, liberating pattern. The journal transformed from a record of loyalty into a blueprint of betrayal. The realization was profound: Ethan wasn't crazy, forgetful, or inept, he was a target of prolonged, pathological control. The decision to seek professional help at the Maple Street Resilience Center was not a surrender, but a strategic move in a psychological war he now understood. He couldn't dismantle this complex, deeply ingrained structure of self-doubt alone. Dr. Vivian Reyes recognized the unique challenge of recovering from friendship manipulation. When you're dealing with a partner or a family member, the dynamic is often clearer, she explained in one of their early sessions. But a friend manipulates by leveraging shared history and assumed loyalty. You feel guilty confronting them because that means destroying a history you genuinely value. You must learn to separate the history from the toxicity. Ethan wrestled with this truth. He wasn't just grieving Marcus, he was grieving the 14-year shared identity. He was mourning the hypothetical, loyal friend he had invested his life in. The pain of broken loyalty felt like a phantom limake, a constant, nagging reminder of something that should have been there but was tragically absent. The therapeutic work was focused heavily on reclaiming self-trust. Reyes introduced exercises in self-validation, forcing Ethan to counter Marcus's ingrained criticisms with verifiable facts. Marcus said you always overthink the details, right? Reyes asked gently. Now, look at the Xander account. Did you overthink, or did you meticulously plan a highly complex, successful strategy? What is the fact? Ethan learned to interrupt the automatic self-criticism. Fact, the Xander account yielded a 30% increase in revenue. Fact, I built the strategy. Marcuse. Assertion is an opinion designed to control, not a truth. As his internal validation strengthened, Ethan started implementing small, painful boundaries, still within the high-pressure walls of the Sentinel Office Park. This period, leading up to winter 2022, was the testing phase. Marcus, the expert social barometer, immediately sensed the shift. Ethan was subtly reducing availability, declining casual dinners, and insisting on documentation for collaborative tasks. One afternoon, Marcus found Ethan reviewing contracts in the cafeteria area, strategically chosen for its visibility. Marcus slid into the chair opposite him, radiating smooth, urgent concern. Look, I know you're stressed. I feel you pulling away. You look exhausted. It's that new project, right? I told you, it'll take on the difficult stakeholders for you. I know how badly you handle confrontation. Marcus was employing a classic combination, feigned concern mixed with a specific, targeted insult, attacking Ethan's assumed weakness concerning confrontation. Before therapy, Ethan would have melted under the pressure, either accepting the offer with gratitude or defensively trying to prove he could handle confrontation, thereby giving Marcus further control of the narrative. Now, Ethan merely closed his laptop, met Marcuse's penetrating gaze with a calm neutrality, and deployed a practiced, boundary-setting phrase developed with Dr. Reyes. Thank you for the offer, Marcus. But I prefer to manage my own stakeholders. I find that handling confrontation directly is the most efficient use of my time. I have it covered. The response was emotionless, factual, and completely impenetrable. Marcus's face tightened imperceptibly. He recognized the shift. This wasn't the tired, malleable Ethan. This was a man defining his own competence. That's unlike you, E. Since when have you preferred confrontation? Don't get defensive, I'm just worried you're isolating yourself. Remember that time you tried to manage the logistics for the corporate retreat entirely alone? Disaster. You need me to keep you grounded. Marcus was deploying the remember when tactic, weaponizing an isolated past failure which Marcus had subtly sabotaged anyway to discredit current confidence. Ethan felt the instinctive flicker of defensiveness, but extinguished it. He simply stood up. I need to prepare for the 3 o'clock meeting. See you then, Marcus. He walked away, leaving Marcus alone at the table, his well-rehearsed charm momentarily defunct. This series of small, firm refusals was the preparation for the inevitable explosion. Ethan realized that true separation required not just distance, but a public, unambiguous declaration of independence, a refusal that Marcus could not spin or absorb. When Ethan delivered the firm, calm, public no, refusing to take on the favor, the effect was devastating, not just for Marcus, but for the entire carefully balanced social ecology of the executive floor. It was a rejection of the power dynamic, a public statement that Ethan was no longer subservient. Marcus' immediate, furious retreat was quickly followed by the predictable social fallout. The office climate became noticeably colder toward Ethan. Colleagues who had enjoyed the benefits of Marcus' networking and social proximity suddenly had urgent errands when Ethan approached. The ingrained narrative of Marcus as the supportive victim and Ethan as the erratic, ungrateful friend was powerful. Ethan found professional loneliness was almost as exhausting as the active manipulation. He had to learn to operate in the corporate world without the shield or the cage of Marcus' presence. He had to trust that his actual professional output, the successful Xander account, the solid innovation pitched despite Marcus' interference, would speak louder than the whispers. He focused relentlessly on deliverables, using the focused work as an anchor against the social isolation. He documented every professional interaction, refusing to leave any space for Marcus to insert a new, distorted narrative. The hours immediately following the email were terrifying. Ethan anticipated the storm, the threats, the pity plays, the attempts to regain footing. Marcus did call, alternating between aggression, "You're ruining our careers," and manipulative victimhood, "I can't believe you'd abandon me when I need you most, eh? After everything I've done for you." Ethan didn't answer. He watched his phone ring, the sound cutting through the air of the Hawthorne lofts, but he held firm. Blocking the number was a physical act of liberation. He picked up the silver key one last time, turned it over in his hand, realizing that its weight was the weight of control, and then, with zero ceremony, dropped it into the deepest part of the trash receptacle. It was worthless. The recovery that followed was not a straight line, it was a grueling, uphill climb. The lack of active manipulation didn't erase the deep-seated psychological scars. Ethan still had moments of intense self-doubt, finding himself analyzing his words before speaking, fearing he had made a mistake. He had to grieve the friend he had manufactured, the loyal bond that never existed. The Maple Street Resilience Center became his sanctuary. The focus shifted from recognizing the manipulator to healing the damage. He learned about fawning, the tendency to appease the manipulator to prevent conflict, a behavior he had mastered over years. He realized that his constant exhaustion stemmed from the emotional labor of managing Marcus' fragile ego and volatile narratives. 6 months after the separation, Ethan started feeling the profound difference. The silence in the Hawthorne lofts was no longer heavy with dread, it was peaceful, offering space for genuine introspection. His work at the Sentinel Office Park, while socially challenging, was professionally rewarding because his successes were now entirely his own, untainted by borrowed credit or subtle sabotage. He continued his sessions with Dr. Reyes, refining the armor of self-awareness he had built. He looked different. The lines of chronic fatigue were smoothed out. His expression was engaged, no longer guarded. He didn't just understand the betrayal intellectually, he had metabolized the pain and transformed it into strength. "When I first came here, Dr. Reyes," Ethan said, resting his hand on the well-worn connection journal, which was now exclusively a document of self-validation and future planning. I was terrified of being alone. Marcus had convinced me that my judgment was flawed, that my feelings were overreactions, and that I needed him to function. He detailed the profound difficulty of the post-confrontation loneliness, the challenge of maintaining professional credibility against the sustained narrative Marcus had attempted to disseminate. The most significant step in the healing wasn't just cutting the cord. It was understanding that I had internalized Marcus' voice. Every time I questioned myself, every time I feared failure, that was Marcus' programming running. I had to systematically reboot my own operating system. Ethan spoke about how he had learned to recognize the subtle, early warnings of narcissistic entitlement and boundary violations, not just in others, but in the echoes of his own behavior. He realized that loyalty, when misplaced and unconditional, becomes a liability. I learned that vulnerability is sacred, and it should only be shared with those who have demonstrated consistent, verifiable trustworthiness, not those who use it as a weapon. He paused, a genuine, reflective calm settling over him. I survived the death of a friendship that never truly lived. I mourned the loss, but I gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge of what I deserve, and the self-respect required to demand it. The betrayal was the most painful thing I've ever experienced, but it was also my greatest teacher. He looked at Dr. Reyes, offering a small, resolute smile. I am no longer carrying dead weight. I am whole. I am free. The session concluded. Ethan stood up, feeling the stability of the floor beneath his feet, a stability that had been denied to him for years. He walked out of the Maple Street Resilience Center, into the crisp, clear air. He didn't look back at the Sentinel Office Park skyline with dread or bitterness. He looked forward, armed with hard-won self-awareness, ready to navigate the world, no longer seeking external validation, but anchored securely in himself. The chapter was definitively closed, the wounds were healing, and the long, difficult path of recovery had culminated in the triumph of true self-protection. He understood, finally, that the cost of misplaced loyalty, though agonizing, ultimately purchased the invaluable currency of self-trust. He was ready to live a life on his own terms. The hours immediately following the dispatch of the document of Desvincula Cow were a terrifying vacuum. Ethan sat in the sterile silence of the Hawthorne lofts, gripping the edges of his dining table, waiting for the psychological tidal wave he knew Marcus would unleash. The formal email, cold, contractual, and devoid of emotion, was a declaration of war on Marcus' carefully constructed reality, and Marcus was not a man who accepted defeat, or even contradiction, gracefully. The phone screen lit up, a hostile beacon in the twilight. Marcus. The call came from his private line, the one reserved for our confidential discussions and late-night, intimate manipulations. Ethan did not answer. He watched the name flash, a primal fear seizing his chest, a deep, conditioned response that demanded immediate appeasement. For 14 years, that name on the screen had meant an obligation to mitigate Marcus' mood, to absorb his anxieties, to manage his complex web of professional and personal needs. To ignore it felt like cutting off a limb. The phone rang 4 times. Then a text message followed, rapid fire, shifting tone as fast as Marcus could process the rejection. Ethan felt the familiar pressure to explain himself, to justify his sanity, to retract the document as a moment of temporary stress. This was the first hurdle of recovery, a resisting the automatic urge to fawn. Dr. Reyes had been explicit, your trauma response is geared toward minimizing conflict by sacrificing truth. You must recognize the hook and refuse the pull. He categorized the tactics immediately, using the mental framework he had built in the connection journal, guilt by implication of damaged partnership and dismissal of authority. Don't be rash. Ethan did not respond. He simply opened his contacts list and blocked the number. The action was brutally final, a digital guillotine severing the possibility of future dialogue. It was not anger that motivated the move, but a surgical necessity. He understood that engaging in an emotional defense would only provide Marcus with fresh material to spin and distort. The physical sensation was one of violent withdrawal. His body, trained for years to operate under the stress of Marcus's control, suddenly had no defined enemy to manage. He experienced restless nights and sharp, unexplained anxiety during the day. This wasn't freedom yet, it was the raw, open wound of detoxification. The emotional dependency Marcus had engineered was proving harder to sever than the professional ties. He forced himself to sit down and write in the connection journal, not about Marcus, but about his own sensations. Entry, at day 1 post-severance. The silence is deafening. I keep waiting for the shoe to drop. The anxiety is the most insidious part. It tells me I made a mistake, that I need Marcus to validate my decision. I am grieving the idea of the friend, the loyalty I thought we had. I am not grieving Marcus himself. He never existed. I am grieving a fictional construct of 15 years. This pain is real grief. He knew the path to healing required meticulous self-reassurance. Every morning, he looked at his reflection, the 35-year-old man with the chronic fatigue lines, and consciously practiced self-validation. You saw the truth. You acted decisively. Your judgment is sound. The Maple Street Resilience Center remained his anchor. Reyes understood that the core work now was not identification, but reconstruction. The manipulator uses cognitive distortions to create a funhouse mirror of reality, Dr. Reyes explained during a session focused on emotional inheritance. Your mission now is to systematically smash those mirrors. We need to isolate Marcus' voice from your own internal monologue. Ethan recounted the constant inner critic, you're being difficult. You overthink things. You can't handle confrontation. When that voice surfaces, Dr. Reyes instructed, you must interrupt it with an irrefutable fact that you produced, validated by external evidence. We are teaching your brain that Marcus' narrative is unreliable information. This led to the fact inventory exercise. Ethan carried small index cards. On one side was a common critical statement Marcus had leveraged, on the reverse was the evidence that disproved it. Card 1 front, Marcus said I needed him to keep me grounded in business, implying I am scattered. Card 1 back, a fact, I successfully managed the Xander account transition 2021 solo for 6 months post-initial phase. Budget adherence, in 99.8%. External validation, client commended Keller's meticulous oversight. Card 2 front, Marcus always made me feel my emotions were disproportionate, especially my nervousness about public speaking. Card 2 back, a fact, speaking nervousness is common and normal. My preparation for the annual summit was exhaustive and resulted in a strong, clear presentation Q4 2022. My feeling was normal, Marcus' reaction was designed to destabilize. This intensive, almost military-like intellectual reframing started to chip away at the internalized manipulation. Ethan discovered that the exhaustion he had experienced for years was the cost of constantly fighting an internal battle against a distorted self-image. Now, the energy previously used for self-doubt was redirected towards self-rebuilding. Ethan had anticipated this. He maintained an impeccably professional demeanor. He was neither warm nor antagonistic toward former mutual colleagues, he was simply efficient and distant. He had lost the social buffer Marcus provided, and the isolation was stark. He ate lunch alone, navigated meetings without the familiar, subtle signals from Marcus, and found that casual water-cooler conversations evaporated when he approached. The true test of his recovery came not from Marcus' direct action, but from a subtle corporate maneuver designed to test his new boundaries. A major project, Project Chimera, was underway, a high-stakes, cross-departmental integration essential for year-end bonuses. Historically, Marcus would have positioned himself as the benevolent coordinator, subtly shifting the high-risk, detail-heavy tasks onto Ethan, then claiming credit for the overall seamless execution. The project leader, Sandra, a longtime acquaintance of Marcus, approached Ethan with a request, cloaked in casual camaraderie. Hey Ethan. Marcus mentioned you're a wizard with data modeling. We have this one tricky module, the vendor data assimilation, it's hellishly complex. Marcus suggested you might want to dive into it, says it's right up your alley, that you always need a good detail puzzle to keep you busy. The framing was perfect, a professional compliment interwoven with Marcus' standard dismissive implication that Ethan was only useful for mundane, tedious details, not high-level strategy. Marcus was still attempting to control Ethan's workload, even by proxy, leveraging Sandra's belief in the Marcus-curated narrative. Before the therapy, Ethan would have automatically accepted, fluttered by the perceived compliment and afraid of disappointing the team. The fawning response would demand compliance. Now, Ethan paused, recognizing the echo of the control. He looked directly at Sandra, his expression calm and professional, projecting the non-negotiable competence he had rebuilt. Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate the thought. However, my focus is currently dedicated entirely to optimizing the core compliance modules, which require my full attention. I'm happy to consult on the data assimilation team's progress, but I won't be taking on execution for that module. I'm sure your assigned data specialist can handle the complexity. He used the professional language of prioritization and capacity, refusing to accept the implication that he needed a puzzle to occupy him. He had set a boundary, defined his own scope, and did so without apology or emotional explanation. Sandra looked slightly taken aback. Oh. Right. Marcus made it sound like you were looking for that kind of deep dive. My professional objectives are clear, Sandra, Ethan reiterated smoothly. I define my workload based on impact to the company's bottom line, not personal preference. Let me know if you need any compliance documentation review. The interaction was brief, clean, and devastatingly effective. Ethan had not been rude, he had been assertive. He had not justified, he had stated facts. He had refused to be maneuvered into a role defined by Marcus. Sandra left, probably confused, but respecting the boundary. The victory was silent, but profound. It was the moment Ethan realized that Marcus' control was not a physical chain, but a professional perception, and that perception was dissolving with every moment of self-definition. This series of small, boundary-setting victories in the workplace solidified his external world, but the internal reconstruction, the grief work, remained the hardest challenge. Ethan found himself frequently returning to the early pages of the Connection Journal, the pages he had filled years ago with sentimental accounts of shared triumphs and supposed mutual support. He had to face the reality that those memories were either manufactured by Marcus or interpreted through the lens of Ethan's own desperate need for loyalty. He remembered one night, early in the friendship, when Marcus had stayed up all night helping him prepare for a crucial presentation after Ethan's computer crashed. A memory of profound, selfless camaraderie. Now, rereading his own notes, combined with the forensic evidence he had accumulated, a darker truth emerged. Marcus had insisted they use his older, less reliable laptop for the presentation, despite Ethan's perfectly functional machine being available. When the crash occurred, conveniently requiring Marcus to step in as the savior, Marcus gained a powerful, enduring narrative of loyalty and indispensable support. The crash wasn't necessarily deliberate sabotage, but the utilization of the resulting chaos was classic Marcus, creating a dependency debt. The grief hit hardest when he realized the depth of his own emotional investment into a lie. He wasn't grieving a friend who turned bad, he was mourning the realization that the loyal, dedicated friend he believed in never existed. That friend was a composite character built by Ethan's own hope and Marcus' strategic performance. Reyes addressed this painful separation. You are mourning the death of a future you anticipated, a history you believed was solid. That grief is valid. But remember, Ethan, the loyalty you felt? That was your capacity for loyalty. You didn't lose that capacity, you just misdirected it. You are not mourning the loss of a valuable person, you are mourning the loss of your own wasted effort. This reframing was transformative. Ethan began to see the betrayal not just as a violation to him, but as a painful lesson for him. The lesson, loyalty must be earned through consistent, verifiable trustworthiness, not assumed through proximity or history. He started applying this new standard to every relationship in his life, recognizing that the deep pain caused by Marcus had inadvertently sharpened his discernment, making him hyper-aware of subtle entitlement, boundary crossing, and the strategic deployment of charm. He analyzed the symbolic weight of the objects Marcus had used to bind him. The silver key, which he had discarded immediately after sending the final document, was now just a fleeting memory. He had imagined Marcus finding it in the garbage, perhaps calling him to confront the theatrical gesture. But Marcus didn't call. He never sought emotional closure, he sought control. When the control was truly gone, Ethan ceased to be interesting. The silence from Marcus confirmed the transactional nature of their entire history. The key had been an emblem of ownership, not connection. Ethan looked at his life in the Hawthorne lofts. The apartment was still modern and high-rise, but it felt open now, not claustrophobic. He had reorganized his professional life, taking back ownership of projects and credit, and refusing to mediate in workplace politics that did not directly involve him. He was performing better, not worse, without the anchor Marcus had claimed to be. The need for validation from others waned. He was intrinsically motivated, powered by a hard-won self-trust. The journey culminated, not in a moment of dramatic realization, but in a quiet, profound acceptance of his new reality. He scheduled what he termed, in his own mind, the final integration session with Dr. Reyes, intending it to be a testament to the completion of his psychological architecture. He entered the Maple Street Resilience Center, the air of calm reassurance washing over him. He carried the well-worn connection journal, its pages now filled predominantly with notes on his own strengths, his newly defined boundaries, and his future goals. Reyes smiled warmly as he settled in. "Ethan, you look different. Not just rested, but solid." Ethan nodded, reflecting on the arduous psychological climb. He began to speak, not recounting history, which was now irrelevant, but articulating the distilled wisdom of his trauma. "The most challenging part of recovery, doctor, was separating the genuine pain from the self-blame. Marcus didn't just lie to me, he successfully installed a belief that I was inherently flawed, needy, and slightly incompetent. That belief system allowed him to operate unimpeded. The betrayal wasn't the lie itself, but the success he had in making me participate in my own professional and emotional subordination." He spoke about the insidious nature of the erosion. It's easy to dismiss a manipulator who is loud or overtly cruel. Marcus was insidious. He masked his cruelty as concern, his ambition as mutual support. He leveraged my core values, loyalty and teamwork, against me. I had to learn that true loyalty includes loyalty to oneself, a boundary that says, I deserve truth, and I deserve respect. Ethan recounted the specifics of the deprogramming, detailing the difficulty of confronting the ghost of loyalty. I realized I had elevated Marcus to a position of infallible strategic authority, believing that his success proved his competence, and therefore, his criticisms of me must be true. It was only when I realized that his success was partially built on my suppressed competence that the illusion shattered. The quarterly innovation pitch, for instance. I didn't need his pragmatic eye, I needed my own conviction. Stripping down my proposal wasn't improving it, it was ensuring my work would never outshine his perceived intellect. He paused, gathering a breath, but his gaze remained steady. This was the moment of full acceptance, the emotional climax of his journey, not a confrontation with Marcus, but a final, internal confrontation with the internalized toxic dynamic. The true cost of misplaced loyalty, Ethan continued, leaning forward, his voice low but powerful, was the loss of self-trust. For years, I defaulted to Marcus' narrative because distrusting him felt like losing my best friend. Now, I understand that trusting him was losing myself. The healing was the painful process of reversing that equation. I had to trust my gut, trust my memory, and trust the external facts, even when those facts contradicted the voice I had heard for 15 years. He looked down at the connection journal. This book started as a monument to a beautiful, genuine friendship. It ended up being the forensic evidence that exposed a psychological trap. Now, it's neither. It's simply a record of my self-reclamation. It contains the blueprint for my future, defined by my standards, not by someone else's need for control. Reyes watched him, a professional admiration clear in her expression. And the goal now, Ethan? The goal is not revenge, or even complete forgiveness, Ethan stated firmly. The goal is impenetrable self-protection through self-awareness. I learned how to recognize the signals, the instantaneous guilt-tripping, the immediate dismissal of my feelings, the subtle undermining of my competence. I learned that when someone is trying to manage your perception of reality, they are trying to manage you. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened expression that erased years of emotional exhaustion. The friendship died. And I mourned the man I was before the betrayal, the man who was so easily manipulated by the promise of shared loyalty. But that pain has served its purpose. It taught me a fundamental truth: I am enough. My competence is my own. My emotional responses are valid. And I do not require external validation to know my worth. Ethan closed the journal. I am no longer carrying dead weight. I am whole. I am free. The session concluded with a final handshake, a mutual recognition of the hard work accomplished. The triumph was quiet. There were no fanfare or dramatic reveals. The victory was the simple, profound fact that he no longer questioned the space he occupied. He understood that the most devastating psychological trap had been sprung by someone claiming the mantle of loyalty, but his recovery had armed him with an understanding of true resilience. He had paid the excruciating cost of misplaced loyalty, and in return, he had purchased the only currency that mattered, unwavering trust in himself. He stepped fully into the cool, clear air, a man defined only by his own hard-won strength. The chapter of manipulation definitively closed. He was ready to live the rest of his life, awake and protected. If this incident truly shattered your perspective, like and subscribe for the next undeniable truth.